Robert thought his marriage to Yvonne was built on love, until the night she whispered those words that shattered everything. "I only married you because I couldn't have your brother." For 3 years, he'd believed in their beautiful story, the way she looked at him on their wedding day, the promises they made under that flower-covered arch, while their families watched with tears of joy. But as he stood frozen in their darkened bedroom at 2 in the morning, watching her sleep peacefully beside him after that confession slipped out during what she thought was a private phone call, Robert realized his entire life had been a carefully constructed lie. Every kiss had been a placeholder. Every "I love you" had been meant for someone else. Every moment of intimacy had been her closing her eyes and pretending he was the man she really wanted. And what he was about to do next would destroy 2 families, break his parents' hearts, force everyone to choose sides, and expose secrets that had been buried for nearly 3 decades. But he couldn't live another day as someone's consolation prize, another hour as the backup plan, another minute as the brother who wasn't good enough. But before we continue with this beautiful story, please kindly subscribe to this channel and comment where you are watching from, and also share below. What life or relationship challenge are you facing right now? Or what someone you know is going through? Don't forget to like this video as well. We will be happy to have this video get to 10,000 likes. All these mean a lot to us. Robert Reynolds had always been the steady one, the dependable brother, the guy who showed up 15 minutes early to everything, kept his promises without fail, paid his bills on time, and never caused drama at family gatherings. His older brother, Derek, was the opposite, charismatic, adventurous, spontaneous, the kind of man who walked into rooms and changed the energy instantly. People gravitated toward Derek like moths to a flame. Growing up, Robert had learned to be okay with living in that shadow. He'd made peace with being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one parents trusted but didn't brag about at dinner parties. Then he met Yvonne Martinez at his company's holiday party 4 years ago, and everything changed. She was new to the marketing department, transferred from the West Coast office just 3 months prior. Brilliant and beautiful, with this infectious laugh that made everyone around her smile, she had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room when she talked to you. Robert fell hard and fast, harder than he'd ever fallen for anyone. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was the one who got something first, something special that was just his, something Derek didn't have claim to. Their courtship was a whirlwind that swept Robert off his feet completely. 6 months of late-night conversations that stretched until dawn, weekend road trips to small towns they'd never heard of, hiking trails where they talked about their dreams and fears, and the kind of soul-deep connection Robert had only read about in novels. Yvonne seemed to understand him in ways no one ever had. She laughed at his jokes, appreciated his steadiness, said his reliability was sexy rather than boring. She made him feel seen. When he introduced Yvonne to his family at Sunday dinner, a sacred Reynolds family tradition, he watched nervously as his parents fawned over her. His mother immediately loved her, asking about her childhood in Texas, her career ambitions, her thoughts on eventually having children. His father peppered her with questions about sports and politics, his way of sizing up whether someone was worthy of his son. But it was Derek's reaction that stuck with Robert like a splinter he couldn't remove. His brother had gone quiet, studying Yvonne with an intensity that made Robert uncomfortable. His usual charm dimmed to something Robert couldn't quite read. "She's great, Mark," Derek had said later, pulling him aside in the kitchen while everyone else was having dessert. "Really great. You're lucky." Something in his tone felt off, like there were words underneath the words, meanings Robert couldn't decipher. But he pushed the feeling away, told himself he was being paranoid, reading into things that weren't there. Derek had always been protective, maybe even a little jealous when Robert achieved something significant, landing a promotion, buying his first house, accomplishing something before Derek did. This was probably just big brother worry, wanting to make sure Yvonne was good enough for his little brother. The engagement came 10 months into their relationship, after Robert had carefully saved for the perfect ring and planned the perfect proposal. He did it on a beach at sunset, the whole romantic setup that Yvonne had once mentioned loving when they'd watched some romantic comedy together. She said yes with tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking as he slipped the ring on her finger, and Robert felt like the luckiest man alive. He'd won the lottery. He'd gotten the girl of his dreams. He'd finally stepped out of Derek's shadow into his own light. But little did he know, those tears held secrets that would poison everything, rot their marriage from the inside out, and leave him questioning every moment they'd ever shared. The wedding was perfect, at least on the surface. Yvonne looked absolutely stunning in her white dress, a vision walking down the aisle as a string quartet played and sunlight streamed through the venue's windows. When she walked toward him, Robert's heart hammered so hard he thought everyone could hear it echoing through the space. He noticed she seemed distracted during the ceremony, her eyes occasionally drifting to the crowd, scanning faces like she was looking for someone or something, but he chalked it up to normal wedding day nerves. Everyone gets nervous on their wedding day. It's natural, expected, nothing to worry about. What he didn't see, what he had no way of seeing from where he stood at the altar, was the way Yvonne's gaze kept finding Derek in the third row, or how Derek excused himself twice during the reception, stepping outside for air that he didn't really need, or how Yvonne watched the door each time Derek disappeared, her smile faltering before she plastered it back on. The first year of marriage was good, not perfect, what marriage is, but solid enough that Robert thought they were building something lasting. They bought a small house in the suburbs with a backyard and good schools nearby for the future. They adopted a rescue dog named Pepper, a golden retriever mix who became their baby before they had actual babies. They fell into comfortable routines, coffee together before work, alternating who cooked dinner, Netflix binges on weekends, Sunday dinners with Robert's family. Robert worked his steady job as a financial analyst, while Yvonne climbed the corporate ladder at her firm, earning promotions and recognition. They talked about having kids someday, maybe in another year or two, once they were more established. But there were moments, small things that didn't quite add up, details that nagged at Robert's subconscious even when he tried to ignore them. Like how Yvonne always found excuses to skip family gatherings when Derek would be there. She'd suddenly have a work deadline, or a migraine, or plans with her sister that she'd forgotten about. Or how she'd go quiet and distant after those rare occasions when Derek stopped by their house to drop something off or borrow a tool. She'd retreat into herself, become unreachable, spend hours in the bedroom or bathroom claiming she didn't feel well. Robert told himself he was being paranoid. Yvonne was just introverted around his family. She needed space. Some people weren't great with extended family obligations, and that was okay. He didn't need her to be best friends with Derek. The cracks started showing in year 2, hairline fractures that spread slowly but steadily. Yvonne became secretive with her phone, angling it away when Robert walked by, taking calls in other rooms, password protecting everything when she'd never bothered before. She started working late more often, coming home at 9 or 10 at night with excuses that felt rehearsed, explanations that were just detailed enough to be believable, but not specific enough to verify. When Robert suggested couples therapy to work on their communication, because he'd noticed they barely talked anymore beyond logistics and surface-level check-ins, she got defensive. "There's nothing wrong with us," she'd snap, her eyes flashing with something that looked like panic. "Why do you always have to overthink everything? Why can't you just be happy with what we have?" But Robert couldn't shake the feeling that his wife was slipping away from him, like trying to hold water in his hands. He tried everything he could think of: surprise date nights at restaurants she loved, weekend getaways to bed and breakfasts, love letters left on her pillow expressing his feelings, because maybe he wasn't saying it enough out loud, flowers delivered to her office for no reason except that he loved her. Nothing seemed to reach her. It was like loving a ghost, reaching for someone who was physically present, but emotionally somewhere else entirely. Then came Derek's engagement party 6 months ago, and everything crystallized. His brother had finally settled down with a woman named Sophie, a pediatric nurse with a warm smile and easy laugh who seemed to genuinely adore Derek. The whole family was thrilled. Robert's parents were already planning the wedding in their heads, talking about grandchildren, about how wonderful it was that both their sons were happily settled. Robert was happy for Derek, genuinely happy, ready to celebrate his brother's joy. Yvonne refused to go. "I'm not feeling well," she said, lying in bed with the covers pulled up to her chin, even though it was only 6 in the evening. "You go without me. Make my excuses." "It's Derek's engagement party," Robert had argued, frustrated. "It's important. My parents will be disappointed if we're not both there." "Then you should definitely go," Yvonne said, not meeting his eyes. "I really can't. I'm sorry." Robert went alone, fielding questions all night about where his wife was, making up excuses about a stomach bug that had hit her suddenly. His mother looked disappointed, pursing her lips in that way that meant she was hurt, but wouldn't say so directly. His father made jokes about keeping wives happy, about how marriage meant sometimes going to events solo. And Derek looked relieved when Robert explained Yvonne wasn't coming, like some weight had lifted off his shoulders. That was the moment Robert's suspicions crystallized into something darker, something he couldn't ignore or explain away anymore. He started paying attention after that, really paying attention, watching patterns instead of individual incidents. He noticed how Yvonne's mood would plummet every time Derek's name came up in conversation, how she'd physically tense when Robert mentioned his brother, how she'd leave the room when Robert FaceTimed with Derek, suddenly remembering laundry that needed folding or emails that needed answering, how her hands would shake slightly whenever they drove past Derek's neighborhood, her knuckles going white as she gripped her purse. This wasn't simple avoidance. This wasn't introversion or social anxiety. This was something else, something that made Robert's stomach turn and his mind race with possibilities he didn't want to consider. If you're enjoying this story so far, pause and comment, "I am enjoying this story," below. 3 weeks ago, Robert came home early from work with the flu. His boss had taken one look at him and sent him home before he infected the whole office. He was dragging himself upstairs to bed, every muscle aching, head pounding, when he heard Yvonne's voice from their bedroom. She was on the phone, speaking in low, urgent tones that stopped him cold outside the door. "I can't keep doing this," she was saying, her voice thick with emotion. "Every time I see you with her, it kills me. You know it kills me. You know what it does to me." Robert froze, his hand on the doorframe, flu symptoms forgotten. "No, he doesn't know," Yvonne continued, and Robert could hear tears in her voice. "How could he? I've been so careful. I've done everything right. But I can't, Derek. I can't keep pretending I don't still feel this way. I can't keep acting like seeing you happy doesn't break my heart every single time." The name hit Robert like a physical blow, like someone had punched him in the chest and stolen all the air from his lungs. Derek. She was talking to Derek. His wife was talking to his brother, telling him things she'd never told Robert, sharing feelings she'd hidden from her husband. "I made a choice 3 years ago." Yvonne's voice cracked, becoming raw and painful to hear. "I chose him because I couldn't have you, because you made it clear you didn't want anything serious, because I was tired of waiting for you to love me back the way I loved you, because I had to move on before I wasted my entire life hoping." Robert's hand gripped the doorframe so hard his knuckles went white, his nails digging into the painted wood. "I know you're with Sophie now. I know you're happy. I see it every time we're in the same room. And I'm trying to be happy too. I'm trying so hard to make this work, to love Robert the way he deserves. But you need to understand, I settled. I married your brother because I couldn't marry you, and I don't know how to live with that anymore." The world tilted on its axis. Everything Robert thought he knew rearranged itself into a horrible new picture. He backed away from the door, his mind screaming, his heart shattering into pieces so small he'd never be able to put them back together. He made it to the guest bathroom before his knees gave out. He sat on the cold tile floor, his back against the wall, fighting the urge to vomit, fighting the urge to scream, fighting the urge to burst into that bedroom and demand answers. His wife loved his brother, had always loved his brother. Their entire marriage was built on a lie, a consolation prize, a backup plan. He wasn't her choice. He was her settlement. He was what she got when she couldn't have what she really wanted. For 2 hours, Robert sat in that bathroom, spiraling through 3 years of memories with this new, horrible context. The way Yvonne had looked at Derek at their first family dinner. That wasn't curiosity, it was longing, hunger, desperate hope. Her reluctance to attend family events wasn't about being introverted. It was about avoiding the man she really wanted, the man she couldn't have. Every kiss they'd shared, every "I love you" she'd whispered, every intimate moment between them, all of it was shadowed by her feelings for Derek. She'd been closing her eyes and pretending. She'd been going through the motions. She'd been trying to make herself love Robert when her heart belonged to someone else. Robert was nobody's first choice. He was the backup plan, the safe option. The brother who was available when the one she wanted wasn't interested. He was Derek's shadow again, even in his own marriage. When he finally emerged from the bathroom, Yvonne was downstairs making dinner like nothing had happened, like her world-shattering confession hadn't just destroyed her husband. She smiled at him, asked about his day, asked if he was feeling better, served him pasta with that special sauce he loved. Robert played along, his mind racing with questions he couldn't yet ask, plans he was already forming. Did Derek know how Yvonne felt? Had something happened between them before Robert and Yvonne met? Was Derek avoiding family events too? That night, lying in bed beside his wife, Robert made a decision. He needed answers. He needed the truth. He needed to know if his brother had betrayed him, if his entire family had been keeping secrets, if anything in his life was real. The next morning he called Derek, keeping his voice carefully casual. "Hey, can we grab lunch?" Robert asked. "Just us. Been a while since we had brother time." Derek agreed immediately, apparently suspecting nothing. They met at their favorite barbecue place, the one they'd been going to since they were kids, where they'd celebrated birthdays and consoled each other through breakups and talked about their dreams. Derek was his usual self, joking, relaxed, asking about work and Yvonne, and whether Robert had watched the game last night. Robert studied his brother's face for signs of guilt, searching for cracks in the facade, but found nothing obvious. "So, Sophie seems great," Robert said, testing the waters carefully. "You two look really happy together." Derek's face lit up in a way Robert had rarely seen. "She is, man. I know it sounds crazy after just a year, but I think she's the one. Like, the actual one. I can see my whole future with her." "That's awesome." Robert took a breath, steadying himself. "Can I ask you something? Did you and Yvonne ever, before she and I got together, was there something between you two?" Derek's smile faded instantly. He set down his drink slowly, carefully, like he was buying time to think. "Why are you asking me that?" "Just answer the question." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications and unspoken truths. Derek looked away, his jaw tight, and Robert knew. He knew before Derek said a word. "There was a brief thing," Derek finally admitted, his voice low. "Very brief. We met at some industry mixer about 4 years ago, before your holiday party. We went on maybe 3 dates, but I wasn't ready for anything serious, and I ended it. I didn't even know she worked at your company until you brought her to family dinner. By then you were already together and happy, so I never said anything. I didn't think it mattered." Robert's vision went red, his hands clenching into fists under the table. "You never said anything." "What was I supposed to say? It was 3 dates, Robert. It didn't mean anything to me. Ancient history. And you clearly loved her. I wasn't going to mess that up over something that was already over and done with. Did it mean anything to her? Derek shifted uncomfortably, not meeting Robert's eyes. I don't know. Maybe. She called a few times after I ended things, but I didn't return the calls. I thought she'd moved on. Then you introduced her as your girlfriend 6 months later, and I figured she had moved on. To you. Robert laughed, a bitter sound that made other diners look over. She didn't move on, Derek. She married me because she couldn't have you. She settled for me because you weren't available. His brother went pale, all the color draining from his face. What? I heard her on the phone 3 weeks ago. She still has feelings for you. She told you herself, apparently. Our entire marriage is a lie built on her loving you and settling for me. Derek looked genuinely shocked, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find words. Robert, I swear to you, I had no idea. Those phone calls, I never returned them, not recently, not ever. If she reached out, I didn't respond. I'm with Sophie. I'm happy. I would never do that to you. You have to believe me. Robert wanted to believe him, desperately wanted to believe that at least his brother hadn't knowingly betrayed him. But trust felt impossible now, like trying to build a house on quicksand. I need some time, Robert said, standing abruptly. I need to figure out what to do with all this. He left Derek sitting there looking shell-shocked and drove aimlessly for hours, his phone buzzing with texts from his brother that he ignored. When he finally went home that evening, Yvonne was cooking dinner again, smiling like they were still the happy couple from their wedding photos, like she hadn't destroyed everything. That night, Robert pretended to sleep while Yvonne lay beside him. Around midnight, she got up and grabbed her phone, slipping into the bathroom. Robert heard the murmur of her voice through the door, caught fragments of words that confirmed his worst fears. Another call, more secrets, more lies piled on top of lies. When she came back to bed, she whispered something in her sleep that made the decision for him. Words that confirmed every horrible suspicion. Words that shattered the last fragile hope he'd been clinging to. I wish I'd waited for you, Derek. I wish I'd chosen differently. I wish I'd had the courage to keep hoping instead of settling for safe. Robert stared at the ceiling until dawn broke, planning his next move. He couldn't stay in this marriage. He couldn't live as someone's consolation prize, couldn't build a life with someone who wished he was someone else every time she looked at him. But he also couldn't just walk away quietly without making sure everyone knew the truth. His parents deserved to know why their son's marriage was ending. Sophie deserved to know that her fiancé had been having emotional conversations with another woman. And Yvonne needed to face what she'd done, needed to own the destruction her lies had caused. What Robert didn't know was that his plan for the truth would uncover secrets far deeper and more shocking than Yvonne's unrequited feelings. Secrets that would prove his wife wasn't the only one who'd been lying for years. Secrets that would rewrite his entire understanding of his family, his identity, and everything he thought he knew about the people he loved most. And what he would discover in the coming weeks would change not just his life, but everyone's lives in ways none of them could have imagined or prepared for. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday evening, exactly 1 week after Robert had heard Yvonne's midnight confession. He'd spent 7 days preparing, gathering emotional strength, rehearsing what he'd say, deciding how to handle this without completely falling apart. He came home from work to find Yvonne in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, humming along to music playing from her phone. The domestic scene felt like mockery now, like she was performing happiness while his entire world crumbled. We need to talk, Robert said, his voice flat and emotionless. Yvonne looked up, her knife pausing mid-chop, immediately defensive. About what? About Derek. About the fact that you married me because you couldn't have him. About the fact that our entire marriage is a lie. The knife clattered against the cutting board, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. Yvonne's face went sheet white, all the blood draining away, leaving her looking almost ghostly in the kitchen lighting. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Stop lying!" Robert's voice cracked, emotion breaking through despite his preparations. "I heard you on the phone 3 weeks ago. I heard everything, Yvonne. I know you still love him. I know our entire marriage is a sham. I know I'm your second choice, your backup plan, your settlement when you couldn't get what you really wanted." Yvonne's careful composure shattered like glass. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but Robert felt nothing. No sympathy. No desire to comfort her like he would have before. Just cold, burning betrayal that had calcified into something hard and immovable in his chest. "How long have you been listening to my private conversations?" she demanded, shifting to offense, trying to make this about his violation instead of hers. "How long have you been in love with my brother while sharing my bed? How long have you been pretending I'm him every time we make love? How long have you been wishing I was someone else?" Yvonne flinched like he'd slapped her. For a long moment she said nothing, just stood there with tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking. Then, slowly, she sank into a chair, all the fight draining out of her. "It's not what you think." "Then explain it to me, because from where I'm standing, you used me as a replacement for the man you really wanted. You married me knowing I'd never be enough." "I didn't use you," Yvonne whispered, her voice barely audible. "I cared about you. I do care about you. But you love him." She couldn't meet his eyes. That silence was answer enough, more damning than any words could have been. Robert felt something break inside him, some final thread of hope snapping. "Tell me everything, from the beginning. You owe me that much. You owe me the truth after 3 years of lies." And so Yvonne talked. Her words came out haltingly at first, like pulling teeth, then faster as the dam broke, like she'd been carrying this weight for so long that relief came with confession, even though it destroyed everything. She met Derek at that industry mixer Robert had heard about, and it was instant chemistry, the kind of connection she'd never felt before. Those 3 dates were some of the best nights of her life. She thought Derek felt the same way, thought they were building towards something real and lasting. But then he ended it abruptly, saying he wasn't looking for anything serious, that he needed to focus on his career, that timing wasn't right. "I was devastated," Yvonne said, her voice breaking. "I really thought we had something special, something rare. When he stopped returning my calls, I tried everything to move on. I threw myself into work, went on other dates, tried to forget him. Then I met you at the holiday party 6 months later. And I was convenient," Robert said bitterly, "available, interested, everything Derek wasn't. No, you were kind and genuine and everything Derek wasn't at that time. You actually wanted a relationship. You were stable and present and safe. You mean I was safe, boring, dependable, the consolation prize when you couldn't get the exciting one." Yvonne wiped her eyes, mascara streaking down her face. "I convinced myself I could love you the same way I loved him. And I did love you, Robert. Maybe not the way you deserved, maybe not with my whole heart, but I tried. I really tried to make it work. You brought me to family dinner knowing Derek would be there. You sat across the table from the man you were in love with and pretended to be happy with me. I didn't know you were brothers." Yvonne's voice rose, desperation creeping in. "When you mentioned your brother's name was Derek, I thought it was just a coincidence. It's a common name. I never expected it to be the same Derek, the man I dated. By the time I realized at dinner, when you introduced us and I saw his face, we'd already been dating for 6 months. You'd already told your family about me. Your parents already loved me. What was I supposed to do? Tell me the truth. And what? Break your heart over something that didn't matter anymore? Derek made it clear he didn't want me. You did. So I chose to move forward with you. I chose to build a life with you. You chose to lie." Robert stood, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. "Every day for 3 years you lied to me. Every time we made love, every time you said, 'I love you,' every time I talked about our future and having babies and growing old together, You were thinking about him, wishing it was him. That's not fair. What's not fair is finding out I'm nobody's first choice. What's not fair is building a life with someone who wishes she was with someone else. What's not fair is being the backup brother. Robert slammed his hand on the counter, making Yvonne jump. Did Derek know? About your feelings? When did you tell him? Yvonne looked away, guilt written across her face. I called him a few times over the past year, just to talk, to hear his voice. He never answered until recently. Robert's blood ran cold, his whole body going rigid. Recently? 6 months ago. Yvonne's voice dropped to barely a whisper. After he got engaged to Sophie, I needed closure. I needed to tell him how I felt, get it out, maybe finally move on. So I left him a voicemail pouring my heart out, and he finally called me back. 6 months ago, right around Derek's engagement party, right around when Yvonne had refused to go, the pieces clicked into place like a horrifying puzzle Robert hadn't wanted to solve. What did he say? Robert demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. He said he was sorry for how things ended between us, that he hadn't been ready back then, but he'd grown up since. He said I seemed happy with you, and that I should focus on my marriage instead of dwelling on the past. Yvonne's voice trembled. But then I saw him at your parents' anniversary party last month, and we talked outside, and what? Yvonne took a shaky breath, fresh tears falling. He told me he sometimes wondered what would have happened if he'd given us a real chance back then. That I was the one that got away, the one he regretted letting go. But then he said he loved Sophie, and we both needed to move on with our lives and be grateful for what we had. Robert felt like he'd been punched repeatedly, each revelation a new blow. Derek had lied to him at lunch. Those conversations with Yvonne weren't one-sided. His brother had been talking to his wife behind his back, having emotional conversations, reminiscing about their past, giving her hope that maybe someday things could be different. I need you to leave, Robert said quietly, his voice void of emotion. This is my house too. I don't care. Pack a bag and go to your sister's, or a hotel, or wherever. But I can't look at you right now. I can't be in the same room as you. Yvonne stood, anger flashing in her eyes despite the tears. You're acting like I cheated on you. I never touched Derek after we got together. I never even saw him alone except that one conversation at the party. I tried to avoid him completely. You emotionally cheated every single day of our marriage. You lay in bed next to me and wished I was someone else. You kissed me and imagined him. That's worse than any physical affair because it means our entire relationship was fake. I was trying to make it work. By telling my brother you still love him? By crying over what could have been? By comparing me to him every single day and finding me lacking? That's not trying, Yvonne. That's torture. For both of us. Yvonne grabbed her keys and purse with shaking hands. At the doorway, she turned back, her face a mask of pain and regret. For what it's worth, I really am sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen. But you did hurt me, worse than anyone ever has. And now everyone's going to know why our marriage failed. Everyone's going to know the truth. Her face paled further. What does that mean? It means I'm done protecting you. I'm done being the understanding husband who makes excuses. Everyone's going to know the truth. My parents, your family, our friends, Derek's fiancé. They're all going to know you married me as a consolation prize because you couldn't have the brother you really wanted. Robert, please, get out. She left, the door closing behind her with a finality that echoed through the empty house. Robert stood in the silent kitchen, his hands shaking, his heart racing, wondering how his life had imploded so completely. Then he picked up his phone and started making the calls that would change everything. First, he called his parents. His mother answered cheerfully, immediately asking about Yvonne, wondering if they were coming to Sunday dinner this week. Robert told them everything in flat, emotionless sentences. his voice mechanical as he recounted the whole sordid story. His mother gasped and started crying. His father went silent, the kind of deep, disappointed silence that was somehow worse than yelling. "That girl," his father finally said, his voice heavy with disbelief. "I can't believe she would do this to you, to our family." "And Derek knew," Robert added, twisting the knife. "He's been talking to her behind my back, behind Sophie's back, having emotional conversations, telling her she's the one that got away." His mother's crying intensified, becoming almost hysterical. "Both of my sons, I don't understand. Derek wouldn't do that. He loves Sophie. He wouldn't betray you like that." "Call him and ask," Robert said coldly. "Ask him about the phone calls. Ask him what he said to Yvonne at your anniversary party." If you're enjoying this story so far, pause and comment, "I am enjoying this story," below. Next, Robert called Sophie. She deserved to know that her fiancé had been telling another woman, a married woman, his brother's wife, that she was the one who got away, that he'd been having secret conversations, emotional affairs, keeping secrets. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and happy, completely unsuspecting of the bomb Robert was about to drop. Sophie met him at a coffee shop an hour later. She looked worried, twisting her engagement ring nervously, clearly confused about why Robert had called sounding so serious. "Derek said you two had a fight? Something about Yvonne?" Robert told her everything, watching her face cycle through shock, hurt, betrayal, and anger. When he finished his story, she was crying silently, tears dripping onto the table between them, her engagement ring catching the light. "He told me about dating Yvonne briefly," Sophie said, her voice thick with tears. "But he made it sound like nothing, like it was years ago and completely over, barely worth mentioning. He never said they'd been talking recently. He never mentioned telling her she was the one that got away. He never said any of that." "I'm sorry," Robert said, and he meant it. "You didn't deserve this either. We're both victims of their lies." Sophie wiped her eyes with a napkin. Do you think they, physically?" "No. I think Yvonne's telling the truth about that part. But emotional affairs can be just as damaging. Sometimes worse because it means the heart was never really yours to begin with." They sat in silence. Two people whose lives had been upended by secrets and lies. Two people who'd thought they were building futures with partners who'd turned out to be in love with each other. Finally, Sophie stood, her face hardening with determination. "I need to talk to Derek," she said. "Thank you for telling me. I know this couldn't have been easy, that you didn't have to include me in this mess." "You deserved to know before you married him," Robert said. "Before you tied your life legally to someone who's emotionally unavailable because he's hung up on someone else." Robert watched her leave, then drove to Derek's apartment. He needed this final confrontation, needed to look his brother in the eye and hear the truth. Derek opened the door looking wrecked, like he hadn't slept in days, his eyes red-rimmed and his hair disheveled. "Robert, I've been trying to call you for days." "You lied to me," Robert said, pushing past him into the apartment. "At lunch, you acted like you barely knew Yvonne, like those 3 dates meant nothing, like you'd never talk to her again. But you've been having phone calls with her, haven't you? Telling her she's the one that got away?" Derek ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration and guilt. "It wasn't like that." "I can explain." "Then explain. Explain how you justified having emotional conversations with my wife behind my back. She called me 6 months ago, completely broken down, sobbing, saying she needed closure before she lost her mind. I felt guilty for how I ended things back then, for being immature and hurting her, so I called her back. We talked once, maybe twice. I told her I was sorry, but that we'd both moved on with our lives. I was trying to give her closure so she could focus on you and be the wife you deserved." "And the part where you told her she was the one that got away?" Derek looked away, shame coloring his face. "I was drunk at Mom and Dad's anniversary party. She cornered me outside, started crying about how hard it was seeing me with Sophie, and I said things I shouldn't have. Stupid, careless things. But I didn't mean them the way she took them. Yes, you did. Robert stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. You've always gotten everything you wanted, Derek. The attention, the charisma, the easy charm. Girls threw themselves at you while I watched from the sidelines. And I've always been fine with that, accepted it as just how things were. But this? She was mine. My wife. The one thing that was supposed to be mine alone. And you couldn't help yourself. You had to keep that door open just enough to make her think, maybe, someday. I didn't pursue her. I was trying to let her down gently. You didn't shut her down either. You engaged with her feelings instead of protecting my marriage. Do you have any idea what that did to us? To me? She's been comparing me to you every single day, finding me lacking, wishing I was you. Derek's face crumpled with guilt and regret. I'm sorry. God, Robert, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. I never meant to hurt you. But you did. And now Sophie knows everything, so congratulations. But didn't just destroy my marriage, you probably destroyed your engagement too. Robert left his brother standing there looking devastated and drove home through blurry vision. The house felt empty without Yvonne, but also lighter, like he could finally breathe properly, like the suffocating weight of her lies had lifted. Over the next week, the fallout spread like wildfire through their families and friend groups. Yvonne moved in with her sister across town. Sophie called off her engagement to Derek, returning the ring and moving out of the apartment they'd been sharing. Robert's parents stopped speaking to Derek entirely, screening his calls and refusing to see him, which made Robert feel guilty despite everything. Friends started choosing sides, asking for details, offering opinions nobody had asked for. Robert threw himself into work, staying late at the office, taking on extra projects, volunteering for assignments nobody else wanted. Anything to avoid thinking about the wreckage of his life, the betrayal that had shattered everything he'd built. His lawyer drew up divorce papers with brutal efficiency. Yvonne signed them without contest, probably relieved Robert wasn't asking for anything except a clean break and the house. But 3 weeks after everything exploded, Robert got a phone call that changed everything again, that revealed secrets buried even deeper than Yvonne's unrequited love. It was his mother, and she was crying so hard he could barely understand her through the sobs. Robert, you need to come to the house right now. It's about your father, and Yvonne, and Derek. There's something, oh God, there's something you need to know. Something that changes everything we thought we knew about our family. Robert's blood went cold, dread pooling in his stomach. What are you talking about? Just come, please, bring Derek. This involves both of you. Hurry. Robert hadn't spoken to Derek since their confrontation 3 weeks ago, but his mother's voice held a terror that made him immediately text his brother, despite their estrangement. Whatever this was, it was bigger than their fight, more important than their mutual betrayal. They arrived at their parents' house within minutes of each other, pulling into the driveway almost simultaneously. They didn't speak, didn't acknowledge each other beyond brief eye contact, but walked to the door together. Their mother opened it before they could knock, her face blotchy from crying, her hands shaking. Come in, sit down, both of you. Their father was sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd had thousands of family dinners, where they'd done homework as kids, where they'd celebrated birthdays and holidays. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks, his face haggard and gray. In front of him was a folder of papers, official-looking documents with letterheads and stamps. Sit down, their father said quietly, his voice heavy with something Robert couldn't identify. Both of you. Robert and Derek exchanged worried glances but obeyed, sitting across from their parents like children called before the principal. Their mother couldn't speak, just stood there crying silently. Their father cleared his throat several times before he could get words out. 28 years ago, before your mother and I got married, I had a brief relationship with another woman, he began, and Robert's world started tilting again. It ended badly. I didn't think anything of it at the time, just a relationship that didn't work out. I didn't know she was pregnant. I had no idea until 6 months ago when she contacted me out of the blue after almost 3 decades of silence. The room seemed to spin. Robert gripped the edge of the table. She was dying of cancer, their father continued, his voice breaking. Stage 4, terminal, weeks left to live. And she wanted her son to know about his biological father before she passed. She wanted him to have the chance to know his real family, his half-brothers, his biological heritage. Derek made a strangled sound, his face going pale. We did a DNA test to confirm her story, their father said, pushing the folder toward them. The results came back 2 weeks ago. Derek, you are not my biological son. Your mother is, absolutely, but I am not your father. Your biological father is a man named Robert Chen, a man your mother dated briefly before we got engaged. A man we both thought was out of the picture. The words didn't make sense, couldn't make sense. Robert stared at the papers without seeing them, his brain refusing to process what he was hearing. That's not possible, Derek whispered, his voice hoarse. I'm so sorry, their mother sobbed, finally finding her voice. I'm so sorry. I got pregnant right after your father and I got engaged. I thought it was his baby. I never questioned it, never had any reason to doubt. But when that woman contacted us with her story, and we did the timeline, and then the DNA test. Wait, Robert interrupted, his mind struggling to catch up. If Derek isn't Dad's biological son, then we're not. You're not full brothers, their father finished, his voice heavy with grief. You're half-brothers. Same mother, different fathers. You share 50% of your DNA instead of the same amount as full siblings. The silence in that kitchen was deafening, suffocating. Robert felt like the floor had dropped out from under him, like gravity had reversed, like nothing made sense anymore. And then, like a lightning bolt splitting the sky, Robert understood why this meeting included everyone, why his mother had mentioned Yvonne on the phone. Yvonne knows, he said slowly, the pieces clicking together in real time. That's why you mentioned her. She knows about this. His mother nodded miserably, wringing her hands. She found out 3 days ago. She came to the house to return some things, boxes of stuff she'd left here over the years. She overheard your father and me talking about the test results, about how to tell you boys. She confronted us, demanded to know what we were talking about, and we told her everything. We couldn't lie, not when she'd heard enough to know something massive was wrong. Robert stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Why would Yvonne care about? And then it hit him. The truth that changed absolutely everything, that reframed every conversation, every choice, every moment of the past 3 years. If Derek wasn't his full brother, if they didn't share the same father, if they were only half-siblings, then technically, legally, biologically, Derek and Yvonne's past relationship wasn't what everyone had thought it was. The family connection was different. The moral implications shifted. And more importantly, oh my God, Derek breathed, coming to the same realization simultaneously. The family tree isn't. Their father nodded grimly, his eyes full of pain and regret. We're still legally a family. I adopted Derek fully when he was born, never knowing the biological truth. But genetically, biologically, you two are not as closely related as we all believed for 28 years. Robert's mind raced through the implications like a runaway train. Yvonne had married him thinking he was Derek's full brother, making her feelings impossible and wrong and completely off limits. She'd tried to move on, tried to make their marriage work, because crossing that line would have been unthinkable. But now, with this revelation, everything shifted. The moral lines blurred, the family dynamics warped into something different. Where is Yvonne now? Robert asked quietly, his voice strange in his own ears. She left right after we told her, his mother said, wiping her eyes. She was crying, looked completely shell-shocked. She said something about how everything she'd given up was based on a lie, how all her sacrifices were for nothing. Then she just left. Robert looked at Derek. His brother, half-brother, looked shell-shocked, his face slack with disbelief. They'd spent their whole lives as Derek and Robert Reynolds, the Reynolds brothers, and now that foundation had cracked wide open, revealing fault lines neither of them had known existed. "I need to find her," Robert said, already moving toward the door. "Why?" Derek asked, his voice raw. Robert couldn't explain it, couldn't put into words the complicated tangle of emotions. Maybe because Yvonne's sacrifice, choosing him over Derek because they were brothers, suddenly looked different through this new lens. Less like betrayal and more like impossible circumstance. Maybe because after weeks of anger, he felt something shift inside him, some understanding that she'd been trapped between impossible choices. Or maybe because he needed to know what she was thinking, feeling, planning with this information that changed the fundamental nature of everything they'd believed. He drove to Yvonne's sister's apartment, his mind spinning with possibilities and implications. She answered the door with swollen eyes, looking like she hadn't slept since the revelation. "I know," Robert said without preamble. "My parents told me everything." Yvonne's face crumpled instantly, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Robert, I am so sorry. For everything. For loving Derek when I married you. For not being the wife you deserved. For all of it. If I had known the truth back then..." "Would it have changed anything?" Robert asked, genuinely wanting to know. She looked at him, pain and confusion written across her face. "I don't know. Maybe. Probably. The reason I chose you, the reason I tried so desperately hard to make us work, was because Derek was off limits. He was your brother, your full brother, family. Crossing that line would have destroyed everyone, your parents, you, our friendships, everything. But now it's complicated," Robert finished, the understatement of the century. They stood there in the doorway, two people whose entire relationship had been built on assumptions that turned out to be fundamentally false, looking at each other across a chasm of hurt and revelation. "What do we do now?" Yvonne whispered, her voice breaking. Robert didn't have an answer, because what was coming next would test every relationship, every assumption, every choice they'd all made. The consequences would ripple farther than any of them imagined, forcing decisions that would reshape their family tree and their futures in ways both devastating and unexpected. Robert didn't sleep for 3 days after learning the truth about Derek's paternity. He moved through life in a daze, going through the motions at work without really being present, his mind constantly circling back to the same impossible questions. What did this revelation actually change? What did it mean for his marriage, his family, his future? Did biological definitions of brotherhood matter less than the years they'd spent growing up together? Did Yvonne's feelings look different through this new lens? Or was betrayal still betrayal, regardless of DNA percentages? Yvonne had called him twice during those 3 days, but he hadn't answered, hadn't known what to say, hadn't trusted himself to speak without screaming or breaking down completely. Derek had shown up at his door once, looking haggard and desperate, but Robert had pretended not to be home, watching through the window as his half-brother eventually drove away. His parents left increasingly worried voicemails that he couldn't bring himself to listen to. The world kept spinning while Robert felt frozen in time, paralyzed by revelations that kept coming like waves, each one knocking him further off balance before he could recover from the last. On the 4th day, Sophie called, her voice steady and purposeful in a way that cut through Robert's fog. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "All of us, you, me, Derek, and Yvonne. This situation affects everyone, and we can't keep avoiding it, circling each other like wounded animals. We need to address this head-on." Robert agreed because he didn't know what else to do, because Sophie was right, because avoidance was only making everything worse. They met at a neutral location, a private room at a restaurant Sophie's friend owned, a space where they could talk without being overheard or interrupted. The four of them sat around a table, the tension so thick Robert could barely breathe, the air heavy with unspoken words and unresolved pain. Sophie spoke first, taking charge of the meeting with the same calm competence she probably brought to her work with sick children. I've spent the last week thinking about everything that's happened. The lies, the revelations, the DNA results, all of it. And I've come to some conclusions that I think we all need to hear. She looked at Derek, her expression sad but resolute, the face of someone who'd done hard emotional work and come through the other side with clarity. I love you. Part of me still loves you despite everything. But I can't marry someone who keeps secrets, who tells other women they're the one that got away, even if he claims not to mean it seriously, who has emotional affairs while planning a wedding. That's not the foundation I want for a marriage. That's not the partnership I deserve. Derek's face fell, devastation written across his features. Sophie, please. I'm not done. Sophie's voice remained steady, controlled. She turned to Yvonne, and Robert was struck by how composed she seemed, given everything she'd been through. You and I have never really talked, but I think we need to now. Because whether we like it or not, whether we chose this or not, our lives are tangled together in ways we can't ignore. Yvonne nodded, looking miserable and small, shrinking under Sophie's direct gaze. Here's what I understand from all the pieces I've gathered, Sophie continued, her voice almost clinical in its precision. You fell in love with Derek before he was ready for commitment. You tried to move on, met Robert, and thought you could build something real with him. You married Robert partly because you cared for him, but mostly because Derek was unavailable and because you thought he was off limits as Robert's full brother. You tried desperately to make it work, to force your heart to redirect, but it never fully let go of Derek. And then you found out that the one reason you absolutely couldn't pursue Derek, the fact that he and Robert were full biological brothers, wasn't actually true. Is that accurate? Yes, Yvonne whispered, her voice barely audible. That's exactly it. Sophie turned her attention to Robert, her expression softening slightly. And you married Yvonne believing she loved you fully, completely, with no reservations. You built your life around that assumption. Then you discovered she'd settled for you, that you were her second choice, her backup plan. You felt betrayed by both your wife and your brother. But now you're wondering if that betrayal looks different given this new information about your family, if the moral calculations change when the family tree gets redrawn, right? Robert couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He just nodded, grateful that someone could articulate what he'd been struggling to understand himself. So here's my question to all of you, Sophie said, leaning forward with intensity. What do you actually want now? Not what you should want according to society or family expectations. Not what's right or proper or morally acceptable. Not what makes logical sense or follows conventional wisdom. What do your hearts actually want, deep down, if you're being completely honest? The silence stretched uncomfortably, each of them looking anywhere but at each other. Finally, Derek spoke, his voice rough with emotion. I want to be honest for once in my life, he began, running his hands through his hair in that familiar gesture of stress. Really, truly honest without hiding behind excuses or half-truths. He looked directly at Yvonne, his expression vulnerable in a way Robert had rarely seen. When we went on those dates 4 years ago, I felt something real, something intense and frightening in its intensity. I ended it because I was terrified of commitment, scared of the depth of feeling, not because I didn't care. That's the truth I've been avoiding. When you called me 6 months ago, Yvonne, I told you those things about wondering, what if? Because part of me, a significant part, always wondered exactly that. And when I found out about the DNA results, about Derek not being my biological son, my first instinctive thought was relief. Relief that maybe the barrier between us wasn't as solid as I thought, that maybe the moral line was blurrier than it seemed. Yvonne gasped softly, her hand going to her mouth, tears starting to flow again. But then, Derek continued, his voice strengthening as he turned to Sophie, I realized I'd been so focused on the past, on this idealized memory of what could have been, that I was actively destroying my future. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Sophie. You see me clearly, all my flaws and weaknesses and selfish tendencies, and you love me anyway. You call me on my garbage and make me want to be better. You challenge me to grow up, to be the man I should be rather than the boy I've been. Yvonne represented this idealized what could have been, this fantasy of a road not taken. But you're the real, complicated, messy, beautiful present and future. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away, holding Derek's gaze steadily. Derek turned to Robert, his expression full of regret and something that looked like desperate hope. And you're my brother. Maybe not biologically in the exact way we thought for 28 years, but in every way that actually matters. We grew up together. We fought over toys and video games and later over girls and opportunities. We supported each other through heartbreaks and failures and triumphs. We built forts in the backyard and shared secrets in the dark and learned what it meant to be men from the same father who raised us both. That doesn't change because of a DNA test, because of some biological technicality. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I didn't handle Yvonne's calls better, that I didn't shut down those conversations immediately and completely. I'm sorry I said things that gave her false hope or confused the situation. But I never wanted to betray you, and I still don't. You're my brother, and I want to find a way through this. Robert felt something crack in his chest, some hard protective shell beginning to fracture. I believe you, he said quietly, surprising himself with the truth of it. I believe you didn't mean to hurt me. All eyes turned to Yvonne, the tension in the room shifting focus. She was crying silently, her hands trembling in her lap, her whole body seeming to vibrate with emotion. I don't know what I want, she admitted, her voice shaking. For so long, years really, I convinced myself that Derek was this perfect person I'd lost, this great love that got away. I built him up in my mind as this ideal that no one else could match, this standard that poor Robert couldn't possibly reach because I wasn't letting anyone reach it. And I punished Robert for not being Derek, which was cruel and unfair and completely wrong. She looked at Robert, her eyes red and swollen. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. You deserved a wife who chose you first, completely, without reservation or comparison. You deserved someone whose heart was fully present, not halfway stuck in the past. And I couldn't be that person. I tried so hard, but I couldn't. The DNA results don't magically change that or erase 3 years of emotional dishonesty. Even if Derek were completely available, even if we tried again with no barriers, I don't know if what I feel for him is real love or just stubborn fantasy, idealized memory that can never match reality. Yvonne wiped her eyes with shaking hands. What I know, what I'm finally ready to admit, is that I need to figure out who I am outside of this triangle, outside of defining myself by which Reynolds brother I can or can't have. I need to learn to be okay alone, to build my own identity, to understand what I actually want rather than what I think I should want. Robert felt unexpected respect for her honesty, for her willingness to admit uncertainty rather than grasping for easy answers. What about you? Sophie asked Robert gently, her voice kind. What do you want? Robert took a deep breath, gathering his scattered thoughts. I want peace, he said finally. I want to stop feeling like I'm everyone's second choice, like I'm always competing with ghosts or fantasies or idealized versions of what could have been. I want a relationship, romantic or otherwise, where I'm not competing, where I'm chosen intentionally and completely. He looked at Yvonne, feeling sadness rather than anger now. I think we need to finalize the divorce, not out of anger anymore, not out of revenge or hurt pride, but because we both deserve a chance to start completely fresh, to build lives that aren't shadowed by the past. Yvonne nodded, fresh tears falling. I agree. I think that's right. But, Robert continued, looking at Derek with something approaching forgiveness, I don't want to lose my brother. Half or full, biologically related or legally adopted, you're my family. You're the person I grew up with, the person who knows my history, the person who shares my childhood memories. And I want to find a way past this to rebuild what we had before everything fell apart. Derek's face crumpled with relief, tears finally breaking through his composure. Thank you, God, Robert, thank you. I don't deserve that, but thank you. Sophie cleared her throat, drawing attention back to herself. Derek and I need significant time apart to figure out if we can rebuild trust from the ground up. I'm not saying never, not closing the door completely, but I need to see change through actions, not just words. If he can prove through consistent behavior, not grand gestures or empty promises, but daily choices, that he's committed to honesty and growth and emotional maturity, maybe we can try again. But that's a big if. Derek reached for her hand across the table, and after a moment's hesitation, she let him take it. I will, he said fervently. I promise I will do the work. I'll prove it. If you're enjoying this story so far, pause and comment, I am enjoying this story below. They sat together for another hour, four people who'd been torn apart by secrets and lies and revelations, trying to map a path forward through honest conversation. It wasn't neat or simple or resolved. There were no easy answers, no perfect solutions, no clear roadmap. But there was honesty, finally, and a tentative commitment to healing separately so they could maybe, someday, figure out how to coexist. Over the next few months, they each focused on healing separately, on doing the hard internal work that couldn't be rushed or shared. Robert threw himself into intensive therapy twice a week, unpacking childhood patterns in adult choices, exploring why he'd accepted crumbs of affection for so long, understanding his tendency to make himself small so others could feel big. Yvonne moved to a different city 2 states away for a job opportunity, creating physical distance that allowed for emotional clarity, building a life where she wasn't constantly reminded of the past. Derek started individual counseling and joined a men's accountability group focused on emotional availability and honest communication. Sophie took time to travel solo, visiting places she'd always wanted to see, reconnecting with herself outside of relationships. The divorce was finalized on a rainy Tuesday in March, exactly 7 months after Robert had overheard that life-changing phone call. Robert and Yvonne met at the courthouse, signed the papers that legally dissolved their marriage, and shared a strange moment of closure that felt both sad and liberating. I hope you find someone who chooses you first, Yvonne said, her voice sincere. Someone who sees you clearly and loves exactly what they see. You deserve that, Robert. You always did. I hope you figure out what you really want, Robert replied, meaning it. And I hope it makes you genuinely happy, not just temporarily satisfied. They hugged briefly, awkwardly, like acquaintances rather than people who'd once promised forever. Then Yvonne walked away, and Robert watched her go, feeling lighter than he had in years, like he'd been carrying a weight he could finally set down. 6 months later, Robert met someone new at a work conference. Her name was Rachel, and she was nothing like Yvonne in any way. She was direct and grounded, a high school English teacher who wore her heart openly and said exactly what she meant. She didn't play games or hide her feelings or make Robert guess what she was thinking. On their third date, Robert made the decision to tell her the whole messy story: Yvonne, Derek, the betrayal, the DNA revelation, all of it. He laid it out honestly, watching her face for judgment or discomfort. Rachel listened quietly, asking clarifying questions but not interrupting, her expression thoughtful. When he finished, she said simply, "That must have been incredibly painful. I'm sorry you went through that." It was, Robert admitted, but it also taught me what I actually need in a partner.
Honesty without games. Intentionality without doubt. Someone who's absolutely certain about choosing me, who doesn't need to be convinced or won over or compete with fantasies. I can do that, Rachel said simply, with the kind of straightforward confidence Robert had been craving. And she did, consistently, through her actions matching her words. Derek and Sophie eventually reconciled after a full year of Derek proving through consistent action that he genuinely changed. They went to couples therapy weekly, established clear communication patterns and boundaries, and rebuilt trust slowly, brick by careful brick. Their wedding was small and intimate, just close family and a handful of friends, and Robert served as Derek's best man, a role that felt both familiar and newly meaningful. Yvonne found purpose and identity in her new city, building a career she was genuinely passionate about and making friends outside of her old social circles and past dramas. She dated casually but didn't rush into anything serious, focusing instead on understanding herself as an individual rather than as someone's partner. In holiday cards to Robert, she wrote about learning to be content alone, about discovering interests and dreams that were hers alone, which felt like its own kind of victory. Robert's relationship with his parents healed gradually through honest conversations and family therapy sessions. They'd apologize profusely for keeping the secret about Derek's paternity, and Robert came to understand, though not necessarily condone, that their choices, however flawed, had come from a misguided desire to protect their family from painful truths. He met his biological grandfather, Robert Chen, a kind man with Derek's smile, who welcomed both Robert and Derek into his life without judgment or expectation, simply grateful to know the son he'd never known existed. The family gathered for holidays again, though the dynamics had fundamentally shifted. There was more honesty now, less pretense in performance. They talked about hard things instead of burying them under politeness and forced cheerfulness. They acknowledged that family was complicated, that love could coexist with hurt, that healing wasn't linear. It wasn't the picture-perfect family Robert had imagined growing up, the Norman Rockwell painting his mother had tried to maintain, but it was real and authentic in ways their old dynamic had never been. 2 years after the divorce, Robert and Rachel got engaged. The proposal was simple, no elaborate production, just the two of them on a hike at their favorite trail, Robert asking if she'd build a life with him, and Rachel saying yes, with tears and laughter. At their engagement party, Derek pulled Robert aside during a quiet moment. "I'm proud of you," Derek said, his voice thick with emotion. "You took something that could have destroyed you completely and turned it into wisdom and growth. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." Robert smiled, feeling the truth of his growth. "We both did. We're not the same people we were 2 years ago. We're better, more honest, more aware." "No," Derek agreed, squeezing his shoulder. "We're definitely better." Robert looked across the room at Rachel, who was laughing with Sophie about something, the two women having formed their own friendships separate from their relationships with the Reynolds brothers. He felt genuine happiness bubbling up, not the desperate, anxious happiness of trying to hold on to something fragile and slipping away, but the solid contentment of knowing he was exactly where he belonged with someone who chose him intentionally every single day. Yvonne came to the wedding, and it was Robert's idea to invite her, surprising everyone, including himself. Rachel had agreed without hesitation or insecurity, confident in their relationship and what they'd built together. Yvonne brought a date, a man named James, who looked at her like she hung the moon and stars. They danced together at the reception, and Robert noticed that Yvonne's smile looked real now, genuine rather than performative, present rather than wistful. During the reception, Yvonne approached Robert and Rachel at their table during a quiet moment between dances. "I'm happy for you both," Yvonne said genuinely, warmth in her voice. "Robert, you look lighter, happier, more yourself than I think I ever saw you." "I am," Robert said honestly. "I really am. And you look like you found some peace too." "I'm getting there finally."
Yvonne glanced back at her date with obvious affection. His name is James. He's a teacher like Rachel, actually, completely different from Derek in every possible way, which is probably exactly what I needed. Different is good, Rachel said warmly, without a trace of jealousy or insecurity. Different means you're choosing something new rather than chasing something old. It really is, Yvonne hesitated, then added with obvious sincerity. Thank you for inviting me tonight. I know it probably wasn't an obvious choice, that a lot of people probably questioned it. You were a significant part of my life and my journey, Robert said, having thought about this extensively. The story of how I got here, who I am now, includes you and what we went through. It felt right to have you here for this next chapter, to show that people can hurt each other and still find peace, still wish each other well. Yvonne's eyes glistened with unshed tears. That's incredibly generous of you, more than I probably deserve. It's honest, Robert corrected gently, and I'm trying to live honestly now, in all areas of my life. No more pretending, no more performing, no more accepting less than I deserve. As Yvonne walked away, Rachel squeezed Robert's hand, her touch grounding and real. You okay? More than okay, Robert said, pulling her close. I spent so long being angry about being someone's second choice, about not being enough. But the truth is, sometimes what feels like losing is actually redirecting you towards something infinitely better. Something you wouldn't have found if everything had gone according to your original plan. That's very wise, Rachel teased, her eyes sparkling. Did you read that in a fortune cookie? Robert laughed, the sound genuine and free. I have my moments of profundity. They danced until late into the night, surrounded by friends and family who'd weathered storms and come out stronger, who'd chosen honesty over comfort and growth over stagnation. Derek and Sophie left early, Sophie's hand resting protectively on her small baby bump, their faces glowing with hard-won happiness. Robert's parents slow danced to oldies, still in love after all these years and all the revealed secrets, having learned that love could survive truth. Robert Chen sat with Robert's father, the man who'd raised Derek without knowing he wasn't biologically his. The two men who'd shared a son without knowing it, talking quietly about baseball and grandchildren and the strange ways family forms. That night, as Robert and Rachel drove home from the reception, city lights streaming past their windows, Rachel asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Yvonne had told you the truth from the very beginning? If she'd been honest about her feelings for Derek before you got married?" Robert considered the question carefully, having asked himself the same thing countless times. Sometimes I wonder, but honestly, I think I needed to learn those lessons the hard way, through pain and betrayal. I needed to understand my worth independently, to stop accepting less than I deserved, to build confidence in myself rather than seeking validation through someone else's approval or choice. Easy lessons don't stick the same way. And now, Rachel prompted, always pushing him to articulate his thoughts completely. Now I know that being someone's first choice isn't about competition or comparison or being better than someone else. It's about intentionality and presence. You choose me every day through your actions, and I choose you the same way. That's the relationship I always wanted without knowing how to ask for it or demand it. That's the relationship you always deserved, Rachel corrected firmly, even when you didn't believe it yourself. Robert smiled, gratitude flooding through him. Yeah, I guess it is. The road stretched ahead, illuminated by streetlights and possibility, by honest choices and authentic love. Behind them was a complicated story of betrayal and secrets, of DNA revelations and shattered assumptions, of pain and necessary endings. But ahead was something Robert had built carefully and intentionally, a life based on truth and self-knowledge, with someone who saw him clearly in all his imperfect humanity and loved exactly what she saw. He'd started his journey feeling like nobody's first choice, like the perpetual backup plan, the brother who wasn't quite good enough. He'd ended it realizing that the most important choice was the one he made for himself, to demand honesty, to walk away from what didn't serve him, to refuse to settle for crumbs when he deserved the whole meal, and to build something real and lasting with someone who met him completely halfway. As they pulled into their driveway, not the house he'd shared with Yvonne, but a new place they'd chosen together, Robert felt the weight of the past finally lift completely. Yvonne had been right about one thing, though she'd expressed it in the worst possible way. They'd both needed to figure out who they were outside of their complicated triangle, outside of defining themselves through relationships that didn't serve them. And in doing that hard work, in sitting with discomfort and uncertainty and pain, they'd each found something more valuable than the fantasy of what could have been. They'd found peace, authenticity, and the genuine happiness that only comes from knowing and accepting yourself completely. Robert's wife had told him she married him because she couldn't marry his brother. So he'd done what once seemed unthinkable. He'd walked away from the safety of a known relationship, demanded uncomfortable truths, rebuilt his life from the ground up with brutal honesty, and found genuine happiness with someone who chose him intentionally and completely from the very beginning. And in the end, that turned out to be the best revenge and the greatest healing of all. Not because he'd won some competition or proven his worth through someone else's choice, but because he'd learned to choose himself first, to know his value independently, to refuse to accept anything less than mutual, intentional, fully present love. The story that had started with betrayal and ended with healing taught Robert the most important lesson of his life. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is actually the universe pushing you toward the best thing you never knew you needed. And sometimes being someone's second choice is actually the gift that forces you to become your own first choice, which changes absolutely everything.